Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spirit Sister Stories, a safe place where women can come together to share their inspirational stories of growth and transformation. I am your host, Toni. We trust the stories of our sisters will move you to rewrite your own. Our guest today is Alix Kram, an incredible human on so many levels. She officially heads up global retail and licensing at Warner Music. She also leads the charge on many creative collaborations at the Kram Collective, and her new role as a beautiful, and inspirational mother. In this episode, we're going to talk about motherhood and making time and space for the evolution of one's identity as Alix moves into this new phase of her life. The journey of making space and integrating who we were, who we now are, the things we want, where we're going, our environments, our family, our partners. I've always been inspired by Alix and her ability to keep it real, her groundedness, her, at the same time, vision for the future and for a life of love and community and connection. One of my favorite people, Alix Kram. I'm so excited to chat with this incredible lady today, Alix. We have been friends for a short time in terms of friendships, but we have covered a lot of ground. You have been there for me personally, professionally, on every level, with some pretty awesome, hard, exhilarating and intense truths that I will never be able to give you all the words to say thank you. And your creativity, your story, your ability to hold space for the community that you have been raising since I've been a part of it, and well beyond that, has been so inspiring and enlightening for me in so many different ways, of these people from all walks of life that you have shifted into an incredible group of people that are really stepping out and doing their work in so many different ways. So I'm super honored today to have this conversation. I feel like it's been a long time coming. And I welcome everyone that's here with us today. Monica, a beautiful friend. We have a lot of history to talk about and a lot of things. I want to start with introducing you and sharing a little bit about your story, if you wouldn't mind, kind of how you've had all these different iterations of yourself and what those steps have been and how it sort of led you to today. And then we're going to touch base on, the subject of identity, which I know is very important to you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Toni. You're too kind. I'm so proud of you and all that you've accomplished and what this is and what this is growing to be. It's pretty incredible. So I'm beyond honored to participate even in the minute of ways. You know my journey well. We met pretty much kind of at the crux of my journey. I had been at a company for over a decade, and I had been in a relationship for nearly just as long. And both started to feel very unsatisfying. And I felt stuck, and I didn't quite know what was keeping me in both of those scenarios outside of comfort and easiness, even though it didn't feel like it was fueled with passion anymore on any level or motivation, quite frankly. So after a few different kind of external catalysts, I took the leap and I went on a bit of an actual journey, and I went to Peru and took a dear friend with me and decided I wanted to hike the Inca Trail. And on a whim while there, took a detour to the Sacred Valley before the hike and met a shaman and sat with the shaman for a few days and participated in a ceremony of San Pedro, which is like a cactus juice. So I went with the idea of trying ayahuasca, and anyone that knows me knows that I'm pretty reserved actually when it comes to trying anything that's out of the ordinary. but something was drawing me to this plant and what I'd read about it, and I'd done my research. And when I met with the shaman after meeting me for a few minutes, he just looked at me and he said, San Pedro, not ayahuasca. And he said, it's far gentler, but no less profound. So I trusted him, and that experience was life-changing. And what I recognized in that experience was that feeling of being stuck was kind of anchored and rooted in this sense of fear, and this sense of fear of not being good enough. And in that moment, with the courage and support of kind of the nature and the mountains around me, I realized that I am good enough. And I know that might sound crazy to anyone who's never kind of tapped into these natural offerings before, but it was definitely profound. And then I embarked on a 4-day trek along the Inca Trail, which ended in Machu Picchu, and my world was changed. I came back to New York and left my job, left the relationship, and completely started over. I had no idea what I was going to do, and took a gamble and a risk on myself. I just let go of that fear and realized, you know, I got this, and it's gonna work out fine. I just held on to that faith and had hope, and that brought me to meeting you, and brought me to where I am today. And it brings every new challenge that comes with each new day, essentially.
Amazing. I actually didn't know about that part of things. So it's really beautiful to hear how it switched back. And as someone that has done ayahuasca, it's interesting. You go in often with an agenda of what you want out of these situations, and that's it maps over quite interestingly to life. And then, you know, this wisdom of these plant medicines and maybe a divine order to some degree really shifts actually into what we need at that moment versus what we think we need, and what that journey becomes. So that's really incredible to see how that, and knowing you now of the I don't know if the adventurous side of things. I can imagine just how profound that was kind of early on in that stage as you were breaking into that, probably what is really the Alix on the inside, but the bit that had been covered up from all of the, I don't know, the societal corporate worlds that we get stuck in, and those pieces.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I've always been adventurous and spontaneous, or I like to identify myself as such, but it's always been with a level of calculated risk. And in that moment and in that kind of shift, I let go of the reins a little bit and just trusted the people around me and kind of the world around me. And it shifted me internally in a very different and kind of profound way, as you said.
Yeah, incredible. So that led you back to the city, then you shifted jobs, you started your own business, and that progressed into sort of another corporate world, but mixing the two worlds in your kind of loves and connections.
Yeah, I took the leap, not knowing what I was going to do, and it kind of naturally, you know, the easiest thing to do is to continue doing what you were doing, but do it on the strength of yourself. Mm-hmm. And so that was the transition I made after going through a cycle of, well, maybe I want to be an auto mechanic. Like legitimately, I was looking at courses to learn how to fix cars. I had this dream at one point in my life of opening an all-female garage. So I went through the motions of different explorations of kind of my next step, and then ultimately chose, you know, the path of least resistance, so to speak, although it was still ridden with hurdles and obstacles, as anyone that's gone into business for themselves knows very well. It's definitely not an easy kind of unbridled path, but I did it. And what I realized in doing that was I had a much bigger support system and network of people that believed in me than I had ever realized or put faith into. And that was incredible. And I just started kind of hitting the ground running, opening myself up to opportunities, opening myself up to new people, including yourself. Something that I kind of kept a little bit more close guard. I started just, again, loosening the reins. And what that brought forth were a number of different professional opportunities. I mean, there were days and months again, if for anyone who's had their own business where you struggle and you wonder, man, how am I going to pay rent this month? How am I going to pay my bills? But it sounds ridiculous to just say, oh, just hold on to faith, because there's a lot of hard work that goes hand in hand with the faith and the hope that you hold on to. Yes. But something would always come through in the clutch of the moment. And that's when I kind of knew that I was doing the right thing and I was on the right path. And so I did that wholeheartedly for a few years before I ended up randomly meeting someone at a random party that I didn't plan on attending, as things happen. And we got introduced and we just started kicking it and talking. And she's like, oh, you worked on that program, you know? And she goes, oh, I really want you to meet my boss. And, you know, we need a shift in the department. And I met her boss, which is now my boss. And we got on really well. I spoke for a few hours. And, you know, I said, if I was ever going to go back in full time in-house somewhere, it had to be with a team where I felt like I had autonomy and there was passion, and with people that I felt like I could look up to and still learn from. And that was what that shift in the music industry gave me. And it really came from the people, and it really came from my boss and the team that I now work with. And the fact and the flexibility that I can still pursue other endeavors, you know, outside of music, is really created a lot of passion and purpose for me, because I like to have a lot of different irons in the fire at any given time.
Yeah. It's incredible to think. There was one piece of advice you gave me when I first started my business, was just have a coffee with everybody. And whilst that is so simple, that really was a foundation to the faith for me coming in, because I knew that just by talking about what I loved, you know, there was something telling me that would lead to things in some shape or form. And whilst not every conversation turned into a job, it turned into sort of me believing in myself, and then me continuing to be able to speak. And then I think, you know, what's interesting is the work that we've done turned up at times that I was in a place that if I hadn't have had that, I'm not sure what things would have looked like. So it's not lost on me, the synchronicity of that sort of playing out between the two of us, which was, you know, really special, and something that I'll always be very grateful for, of how that furthered me in my career, as well as you actually were walking the talk. And I think that's very important, you know, with people. It changes, it's a great segue into, you know, the passion and purpose that you found within the team and the music industry. And that's something that I think is really important. And whilst your identity has been shifting in who you are, from being, you know, fully corporate, going on your own, half corporate, half on your own, and then into your new step of motherhood, that those foundations of passion and purpose really haven't changed. Is there somewhere that you can identify where that came from, as the sort of, you know, younger self Alix through to the present self, and maybe even the higher self, if you feel that they are separate or something together?
I think they're all still me, right? And I think that's what I have to hold on to, even in the moments where it feels really hard, that I feel like I'm losing a sense of self or a piece of myself. And trust me, and anyone who's a mother knows, like, there are moments, and they come in droves, where you wonder and you long for kind of the person that you once were. But like any major change in your life, it's a constant evolution. And so all of those people and all of those different roles, they were still me at the core. But, you know, I liken that to a conversation I had with the shaman, and kind of a reflection on self, where I always felt like I was a very optimistic person. I still very much do. I always felt like I was a glass half full. And at that point in Peru, I felt really like I was running on empty. Like the glass was starting, it had a leak, and it was starting to just kind of leak out. And, you know, he said, and it's not any kind of big, you know, words of wisdom or anything, but it's when words come at a certain, you know, crux and point of a time in your life, that they carry a lot more meaning than they otherwise would. And he said, you know, it's not glass half empty, glass half full. It's, you know, you're the full container. You are full at all times, but it's taking from every experience and moment, drip by drip, to keep that replenished and keep it at the brim. and so that you can overflow. And for me, that simple act of having coffee with people, breakfast, lunch, a drink, anything, a walk in the park, those were those little drips to keep my container full and overflowing. And those were those, like you mentioned, they may not, result in a job or, some sort of big win, but it was those little drips of reminders of building that self-confidence back and kind of that new version of myself, having just spent time and exchanged energy with another person. And it's amazing when you open up to people and they open up to you, that exchange and what takes place it's priceless, really. And we don't do enough of it, quite frankly. We certainly don't do enough of it in business. But, that's what I strive to do on a daily basis. That's what all my relationships are based on.
Yes, and I can definitely speak to that. I think there's something we've been talking about in the context of the camp of women sharing. I think when I was coming up through the event world, we often wouldn't speak to our fellow women in the same level, maybe, or even higher, about kind of the truth of like how we were feeling and what was happening and what it took to execute these plans, and everything was like, no, everything's great and I've got it covered and I'm your client or you're my boss, whatever. And so I think that transparency in those relationships has been certainly a fundamental shift for me. And then being able to engage in business, which, if I'm honest, I feel like that's conscious business making, consciousness in the concept of business and corporations and commerce. And I think that is the way forward of being able, there should be nothing that we're hiding or not sharing, because only by sharing and going through the details can we all have a fuller understanding of what we're doing, and then also deliver it to a degree that it actually makes a greater impact, which is what we're all here for. Otherwise, why get up every day and go to the office?
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting, the world we're living in now, where it's all through screens. You kind of almost have to make more of the effort and in some ways be more present, because where else do you have to be? What else do you have to do right now, right? And there's no real distractions outside of those within the walls of your own home. So it's forcing us into a little bit more of that connection and that conversation. And I hope that, I, for one, don't look at it as superficial by any means. And I've found that, during this time, in some ways, it's captured more attention and in the moment in terms of business conversations. People that I otherwise wouldn't look at face to face because I would just pick up a phone or send an email, I'm now looking at through a screen, and there's more of a connection there. There's more of a purpose and more of a reason to be present and to move things forward. So it's interesting, the shift in kind of the broader landscape and the shift within ourselves. And and to touch on your point, I think women are always kind of carrying that invisible burden of optics and perception that in some ways we should be grateful for the position that we're in professionally. And so we don't want to appear or do anything to look as though we're not. And so we put on a facade often. And now that I'm a mother, it's certainly the case in the motherhood world. I mean, there's so much guilt and shame, and people aren't very transparent or honest or real. And it's frustrating because we all benefit the more that we can be a little bit more exposed with one another. It doesn't help anyone's cause to kind of keep that guard up and keep these feelings locked away.
Yeah. I think there's something from a level of, emotional intelligence that, resonates with me of how we're doing business. I mean, I think even in terms of, we're now in front of people on the camera and we're looking, and, if you're tuned into sort of yourself to some degree, you can feel when people are off and there's something going on. I mean, I think you can feel that when they're not in the room through a phone or something distracted. So it's almost like this flip, as you mentioned, that all of these things maybe that we've been talking about for years and dreaming that would become part of business and part of interactions and relationships and connections on every level, including ourselves and our family and our work and our projects and the people involved. and the switching of the tuning in to actually being like, how is that human inside there, and knowing that, they're presenting themselves in a way, but being able to understand it and make not allowances, but considerations or receptiveness of those sort of truths, I think moves us all again forward in a much sort of more exponential way. I think, everybody knows that you say the truth and it stings for a second, but it instantly dissolves. Whereas if we're sort of hiding and dancing around things, everyone's sort of like not even sure what the hell we're dancing around, but there's some giant elephant in the room, which is exhausting, and we all got enough to do.
It's so exhausting. And I think that that's what is the upside of this whole situation, right? Because I mean, we get up in the morning in the traditional sense, we put on our face, we put on our clothes, which is almost like a costume. You go into the office and you put on this persona and this facade, you have meetings, and, you've crafted this external character for yourself. And I mean, there's so many times that I've been in meetings throughout my career where I'm just like, just cut through the bullshit. Like, come on, like, put the ego aside. Can we just get it done? Like, there's just no need for all of this pomp and circumstance and like show, And I think the benefit of this now virtual reality of this world we're living in professionally is that those lines are blurred. Like in the beginning, I'm sure people were trying to still put on that person in front of the screen, but quite frankly, it's hard. You have kids running around, you have dogs barking, you just don't. Right. So the lines are blurred. There's no fixed time of day where you are, Toni, the work person, and Toni, the family or home person. You're all one at all the time. And so you're seeing people relax. You're seeing people put their hair up in a messy bun, wear a t-shirt instead of like putting on a full face of makeup. And so it's becoming, in a weird way, even though it's virtual, it's becoming somewhat more real. Because you can't hide those things. So, and we're all in this together. So you get on these business calls and it's like, all of those things I just said, and you just have to laugh about it. And right then that kind of wall is broken down, like the fourth wall, right, of storytelling. It's just,
Yeah, that's beautifully said. It's interesting because as we look at, the identity of each of us as humans, and then an identity of brands or industries, this conversation is not lost on me again of the shifts of that. If we think about the music industry and production, even from an event perspective, there was all this, I need this, and my writer is this, and I can't perform without this, and, this agent, this manager, all of the pieces of the puzzle, which are, again, are they costumes? Are we, pawns, pieces of the puzzle that everyone's playing a role to keep an industry going, if I may be as bold as that in that concept. But then you strip it back, you've had every artist under the sun playing from their lounge room. I think one of the most beautiful ones I saw was Ziggy playing with his kids crawling all over, and the son coming in and snatching the drums off the daughter, and there was this real talk, but the music was really the basics of what it is. And so kind of overlapping that into the identity of the music industry and your role in that, as you're constantly evolving within yourself as a human, but also what those conversations are with consumers and brands, and how to tie in what people are looking for with those artists as you kind of rotate. Is there something that sort of pings for you around that subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on a couple of things, right? Again, that persona of like all these little busy bees, people working to kind of uphold this standard and this persona and this facade. Like, do you really need white M&Ms in order to go on stage, or whatever it may be, right? Yeah. But we all run around and we all do these things. And to your point, it's all been stripped back. And I've gone to a number of different concerts in the couch of my living room, and it's been fantastic to see kind of this window in this intimate performance. But on the flip side, I think if I were a performer, like, I can't imagine how hard and almost soulless it is to present your artistry to an audience that you can't see. And that energy is gone. And so I don't think that'll ever go away, but you just can't replicate that virtually. You can't replicate the feeling. I mean, even as a concert goer, like part of the excitement of going to a show is, you might be sat back a mile from the stage and like nosebleed seats, but you have the time of your life because the people around you are having the time of their lives. Like that is what makes us as people amazing, right? It's that shared energy.
Yeah.
But I do think in this new world, brands, artists, performers, business people have to become more creative. And that's going to be the beautiful byproduct of this situation, is that there's going to be new ways of doing things, new approaches, and different ways to kind of get excited and engage. And I think it's breaking the mold. And I think every industry, quite frankly, needed it. I think we all have gotten comfortable in kind of status quo. And when you do that, things don't move forward. And so I think now we're all embracing change, and it's going to be exciting to see what comes of it. But, that human to human interaction and experience can never be replicated, and it'll never go away.
Agreed. Yes. I think it's maybe that's our sign of hope, or that's our faith at this moment, knowing that we will come back to that. And, this conversation around, I think one of the things I really have enjoyed working with you about too is like you've always asked questions around the status quo, like why are we doing this? And I think when I started my own business, that really for me was so important, because we kind of roll in these companies to some degree where everything is just like, well, this is how we do it and this is what, and I want to ask why. Like, why are we doing this? How does this turn the needle for the consumers? How does this serve the artist? How does this bring about the hope, the desire, the concept? And I think right now we're being asked to look at every part of everything, and I think the innovation that will come from this, like you say, is going to be, I don't even know if we know what it will turn into, but it will remain at the core of that connection, which is the exciting part.
Yeah, I think so, for sure. And I look at that with excitement from both sides of the wall, right? From the behind the scenes and from as a consumer or a participant in the experience. But yeah, I mean, that's what I love about you too, is just, working together. You're kind of a partner in the pursuit of breaking the mold, which is hard to find. And it's so necessary. And you kind of get labeled as like, an outlier or a crazy person for thinking things. But I think, I was reading this whole article on the way the brain works and how we almost automatically default to doing things the easiest way possible so that your brain doesn't have to work as hard. I'm not regurgitating this really as eloquently as, reading it yourself would be, but that stuck with me, because you have to continuously rewire your brain to keep it in good health. And sometimes that means thinking of doing things differently than you typically would to create, a different level of challenge and engagement. And it's as simple as when you and I work on developing a trade show booth, like every company for the most part does the same type of trade show booth, because why? It's easy. It's the path of least resistance. You just, put up and you work with the vendors of the convention show and you get this footprint and you put it up, and it's all modular and it's simple. Yeah. And what you and I have done together is really break that out of the box. And the feedback that we've gotten is incredible. And it doesn't mean that it's more expensive. It just requires a little bit more thought and a little bit more problem solving and puzzle kind of figuring out to make it work. But the product and the end product is fantastic.
Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about the evolution of your identity as we go into motherhood, because I think there's an element too around, breaking the mold of what that looks like, and also how do I want this experience to go? I think we could, to your point about the booths, if we look at like the cinema industry, it's fascinating to me. I think I heard this on this guy, Brad Grossman, does this Zeit Guide, super informative, every week, kind of touches different industries. But he talked about how the cinemas have had the same food and the same stuff for years. Like no one is changing that. Like I don't want to eat that stuff. I'm not saying it always needs to be something else, but it's interesting to me that just why that has been so stuck and so rigidly the way it should be. And I think, that even across the music industry, around how we make music, how we share music, what that musical experience is. So let's kind of take that kernel over into motherhood of like how it should be and what people have said and how you've kind of continued to evolve as the Alix that was sort of had the momentum pre-baby, and what that looks like now that you're in this new world, compared to what people say it should be like.
Yeah, I mean, it's a paradigm shift, right? And it started for me, at least, while I was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because your body is going through so many different changes, and as a result, your daily activities change, your environments change. And for me, I hit a point where I think it was like halfway through my pregnancy where I felt this like longing for the sense of self that I previously was, that could get on a bike and ride around town just for my kind of cathartic release, because that was my form of moving meditation. And so I felt like I didn't have these things anymore. And it was the beginning of realizing that your life is about to dramatically shift, because it's no longer solely about you or the people around you. It's becoming about this person and this life that you're bringing into the world. And it's a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of pressure that you already give yourself, but a lot of unnecessary pressure from society and the people that are out there and kind of gloss over and make it look like it's this like, trip to the fair with cotton candy and balloons and things. Like, it's hard work, and I just felt like no one was really talking about it. And I mean, there were so many things I learned in pregnancy that as a woman of my age, like pushing 40, like, how did I not ever hear about this before? How was I never taught these things? How, like, you just get presented an image of what labor and delivery and pregnancy look like through screens, through movies, content, like everything, because no one has actually talked about it in a way that's like mainstream, widely accepted. And so when I started researching and learning about these things, I was like, holy shit, this is like, everyone should know this. And there's reasons why, men become, stereotyped into this role, and why women continue to perpetuate it, because no one is breaking this like open.
Yes.
And it's starting to happen now, which is amazing and wonderful to see. But so when I kind of, again, grabbed the reins back,
Mm-hmm.
And realized that, well, I don't have to just succumb to what, all of these things are in the world in terms of how it's supposed to be, and I can kind of create it for myself. Then I started to really embrace everything, because it was like, well, no one's telling me I can't do this. Like, I can do X, Y, Z. I know how my body feels, and I can do what my body can do, And then, like, I mean, giving birth and going through postpartum in the middle of a pandemic is a whole separate story. And then starting back at work again. But all I can say is it's absolutely asinine for any country to think that a woman should go back to work in the first year of their child's life. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm doing it. And this is the upside of this pandemic, is I'm able to actually do it and still see my child throughout the day. But it's so hard.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't even imagine, especially if you had a traumatic birth, which I did, to then in 3 months have to just pick up all the pieces
Mm-hmm.
and basically create that line again, put on the face,
Mm-hmm.
pretend you don't have all of this stuff going on at home, and present to the world this person who has it all together, who is professional, who can play and do the dance, and then come home and put on a completely different hat. Like, it is tough work.
Yes. So many beautiful things in that. Thank you for being so honest. I love that we literally never leave any stone unturned. There's a few things that mind map the same sort of costumes and roles and sort of play, I think, come across for me in the medical industry is, we shared across some of the times of the appointments of going to see certain doctors, and you need to do this, and this is this, and this is this, and a lot of, maybe it's not my place to say fear-based behaviors, but maybe less emotionally intelligent behaviors that could have changed the way that your experience was. And I think that's an interesting thing as we look at sort of the different industries of how they've all played out, of being in that mold of this is how it should be. When you know your body, and it's almost like we're pulled away from the knowing to then go through a system that we're meant to, because that's how it's structured and it can't be any other way, which takes us again further away from ourselves. You then go into the fact, I think, around actually, having the baby, that you're meant to literally just put all that on hold and again put on the next costume. So it's like we're always moving further from ourselves in order to fit into something different.
Yeah, and it's just this weird kind of Western centric view of the world and how things should be done. And again, in my opinion, it's rooted in ego as well. And it's kind of like a nationalistic ego where it's like, oh, well, we're the best and we have the best meds and we do this. Like, this is the way things should be because of studies. Don't get me wrong. While I'm a naturalist at heart, I fully embrace modern medicine and think it's absolutely incredible what we've been able to do to kind of push things forward. But I do believe in balance. And I think that there's a balance between the two. And so when all the information you're being fed is very much focused and centralized in one point of view, it's really difficult to get the full picture of understanding, especially when there's a whole, rest of the world that does it differently.
Yes.
And they're okay, so where's the marriage between these things? And you really have to seek that out for yourself, which when you're going through hormonal changes and you're figuring out new things, it's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And creating the space for that, it's not given to you. You have to, again, wear all these hats and do all these things and find the space to inform yourself and equip yourself with what you need to kind of move forward on a daily basis. Mm. It's fascinating. And there's so much judgment and shame in that world, like just participating in like different, social groups of mothers, and just hearing the like anger that comes from some of them when someone else decides to do something different than the way they believe it should be done. And it's coming from a place of judgment. That anger is coming from a place of judgment where they don't want to be judged for not doing it the way they're doing it. So they're so steadfast in saying, no, that's absolutely wrong. You should be doing it this way. It's just wild. And when you're going through, and I think people completely discount the physiological changes that a woman's body and, kind of hormonal state goes through after having a child, because, it's a major, major change, and it requires time and space and kind of energy to figure it all out and make sense of it.
Yes. It's interesting thinking about how much, energy is spent trying to keep the facade, keep the costume things going, rather than that could be used, for the greater purpose. And it's interesting as we look at the molds of how, again, that could be different. And I think, we could talk about this all day. I'm conscious of your time too. The role for men and the partners in this, I think, is very interesting. And again, something maybe that's not discussed, of how that shifts, and then how, if there's more truth within the sort of woman's journey of being able to share actually how it is and what that looks like and how it goes, and less energy on covering that up, then, it opens a new space. By reclaiming sort of our journey as being very personal, it opens more space to have that interaction too, to sort of smooth that through.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone plays a part in breaking kind of that fourth wall down, because that's what it is. Like, we're all actors on a stage. at
Yes.
the end of the day, right? And we need to break that wall in order to keep things really real.
Yeah, one big movie. Okay, so you talked about the things that maybe nobody shared with you. If we were going to share with campers a couple of like quick tips, is there anything that comes to mind that you would share of like you really wish someone had have told you?
Well, for one, and maybe this is just me, but everything you've ever been taught or read or watched in a movie is like when you're pregnant, oh, your water breaks, and then guess what? You're in labor and you're giving birth to a baby like in the next like whatever many hours. No, it doesn't happen that way. Like your water could break a week before the baby comes out. Like I mean, from my case, my water broke, a few days before my baby was born. It could also never break. Like you could already be in labor and then it breaks, or the doctor has to break it for you. Like it's just things like that, or this concept of a bloody show. I didn't know what that was, and it sounds terrifying. And it's like, okay, but that's exactly what it is. And that's like typically what happens first, right? Your mucus plug and everything, like all these little details
Yes.
that for me, because I love information, I'm like, why do I have to read this in a book?
Yes. Why
Why do we
can't
gloss over these things?
Yeah.
And for my partner, my husband, it's like I was so overwhelmed with all this information, and I found it so fascinating. I'm like, did you know this? Like, did you know this? And like, for someone on the outside, it's probably really gross, but why should it be that way? It's completely normal. It's human. And guess what? You're a person walking on this planet, so you came from that experience. It's one giant shared experience, yet we all pretend like it doesn't happen.
Yes. Yes.
Crazy.
It is. It is a kind of an interesting point to break on of really how many, how deep these shared experiences are that we're having, and how this moment I think is an invitation for all that to shift and to change so that we can actually reconnect to sort of the roots of who we all are, knowing actually that we're so much more connected than we are. I love it.
Absolutely. I mean, it'd be amazing if we actually started appreciating, things and contributions that people bring to this earth and to each other. And,
Yes.
from everything from teachers to mothers to just everyone. Like it's just, and I think that's what this pandemic has showed too. It showed like who's really essential right now, right? Like, oh, your teachers are, because the minute you had to be home working full time and taking care of kids, you lost your shit. So like, bless all the teachers that do that all day long. The people that are working the grocery stores, shipping all your products out. Like these are things that we completely take for granted and we don't value. They're definitely not valued from a financial standpoint or monetarily, but these are the essential things for us to kind of maintain our lives. None of us and the work that we are doing in terms, and this is something I talked about with all my kind of colleagues and friends in the industry, it's like, it's not essential.
Yes.
No one in marketing, branding, sales, like none of this is essential right now. It's food, shelter, water, and nurture care.
Yes. Yes. Self-care. Right back to the root chakra. It's like the basics of basics of basics.
Yes. And I think we need to see a shift to really reward the people that do those jobs on a daily basis and take on those endeavors, because there's a lot of people that wouldn't.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we have our I don't know, marching orders, or like, I know we're on a mission to do work in this, and I know we're doing it in different ways. So I honor you for the conversation and the truth and the work that you're doing, and for showing up in that journey too. Because I think bit by bit and more and more us showing up and really kind of standing firmly in what we believe and how this can all shift and what the vision of the world could look like is part of how we all incrementally get there. So
Absolutely. Wouldn't it be incredible if women were paid to raise incredible human beings?
yeah,
Like, wouldn't that be amazing if there was reward given for raising like great humans?
yeah, yeah.
It'd be nice.
I mean, it's on many levels. I think about my journey and learning about the moon and the cycles of the earth and things like that. And I think if the journey of learning about the rhythms of the earth through the moon and everybody being connected and how almost I don't know, superpowered when every woman is connected to that. It's like cogs in a wheel. It's like the whole world exponentially shifts forward when everybody's within their purpose and connected to the rhythms of the earth as well as ourselves and each other, and how that how that can have a huge effect on the people around us. So it's interesting times. I can't wait. We're going to need to come back to this in a few
Yeah.
months and revisit. And yeah,
We all just need to keep it real.
yes, amen to that. Thank you so much for today. I love you very, very much.
Love you too. Thank you.
This is beautiful stuff.
Yeah, and this is great for me, and I appreciate it. Like talking about creating space and time.
Yeah,
This created space and time for me to just have a real conversation, and I appreciate that.
yeah. And just holding that mirror back of just what you've done for people, and to not stop, because you have a huge role to play in, but it's really simple because you just be you. So being you is what's helping a lot of people make changes in their life. So thank you.
It goes for everyone.
That's
Thanks.
it. All right, darling. Enjoy your day. Thanks for coming.
You too. Bye, ladies.
Thanks for joining us. Our purpose for Spirit Sister Stories is to create a safe space where every woman's voice is welcome. We invite you to share your story and be heard. And remember, keep shining your light. We'll see you soon.